Hello everybody, in this video we're going to talk about the Canada PR in 2022. This would be a very detailed video and we'll talk about the Express Entry program. We are going to talk about the step-by-step process from the point when you don't know anything about Express Entry to the point you fly for Canada. This would be a very detailed video and would include all the latest updates until June of 2022. And not just the step-by-step process, we'll also talk about the eligibility criteria. We'll talk about all the expenses, the cost and the savings that you need to have so you are financially prepared as well. I'll give you an idea of how you can actually calculate your score, and we'll also talk about the timelines and the trends. So this video is going to be very interesting and helpful for all those people who want to apply Canada PR in the year 2022. Hello everybody, I'm Shitanshu from Dream Abroad and I regularly upload videos to help you immigrate and settle abroad. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider subscribing. Alright guys, I have already made such videos before, but the last video I made was in 2019, probably 3 years back, and many people have requested me since then that they want some updated video. So in this video, as I told you, I'm going to talk about the Express Entry program. This would be the sequential order in which I'll be talking about it. Now, if you already know about the process, if you are midway through, then please feel free to skip this video. This video is primarily for those people who are new to Express Entry and have zero or very minimum understanding about the program. Also, if you're interested in any particular section, I'll provide the timelines in the description box below. You can check it out. Okay, so let's start with the overview. So what is Express Entry? So basically, it's an online system that is used to manage immigration applications from skilled workers. With the help of this particular system, you can actually apply the Canadian PR sitting in your home country. Even if you haven't been to Canada before, you can actually get the permanent residency of Canada while you're sitting in your home country. Now, there are 3 different programs. The first one is the Federal Skilled Worker Program, which is for the skilled workers with foreign work experience. Then there's Canadian Experience Class, which is for the skilled workers who have Canadian work experience. Then we have Federal Skilled Trades Program, which is for the skilled workers who are qualified in a skilled trade, let's say carpenter, plumber, all of those people. But I believe most of my viewers would be from the Federal Skilled Worker Program or the Canadian Experience Class. As I told you before, you need not have any Canadian work experience to be eligible for this program. Okay, now when you know the overview, at least something about the Express Entry program, we can talk about the different steps that are involved. The first step is the language proficiency test. The second one is the education credential assessment. Now the first and second step are actually the prerequisites to apply for the PR. So the order of the first 2 steps do not matter. And actually, to save time, you can do both of these steps in parallel. Now the third one is the Express Entry profile creation. So in order to reach the third step, you would be required to complete the first 2 steps. Now the fourth step is arranging the documents, but before that there's a big barrier. The barrier of getting the ITA through the Express Entry draws. We'll talk about it in detail, but this is the biggest barrier. Now the Express Entry draws are not a lottery system. They're generally conducted on every alternate Wednesdays. And if your score is actually above the cutoff score of that particular draw, you'll get the invitation to apply. We'll talk all about it in detail, so you don't need to worry about it right now. Now the fifth step is submitting your application, and the last step is visa stamping before you fly to Canada. Alright, now let's talk about the very first step in detail. And as I told you, either ECA or language test can be considered as the first step. So let's start with the ECA. So what is your Education Credential Assessment, or ECA? ECA is basically used to verify that your foreign degree, diploma or certificate is valid and equal to a Canadian one. And who would verify that? Basically, there are 5 different organizations which can actually do that. We have CES from University of Toronto, then ICAS, then WES, which is the most popular, then IQAS, and then ICES from BCIT. Now these are 5 different organizations. You can go on to the particular website of these different organizations and check out details. But WES is the most popular one among all of these because its processing time is the least among all 5 of them. Now how much will it actually cost? So it might differ from one organization to the other, from one course to the other, but generally it would be somewhere around 200 to 250 Canadian dollars. The validity is for 5 years and the processing time is around 2 to 6 months. So WES takes the least amount of time, which is 2 months, and some other organizations might take 6 months. They would not assess the certificates of 10th and 12th, but they would assess the highest degree or diploma. A very important point here is that ECA is not required if you got your degree from any Canadian institute or university. Okay, now moving on to the second step, which is the language proficiency test. So Canada has 2 languages officially, English and French, and you have to prove that you're able to communicate in either of these languages. For English, you can appear for IELTS, and mind it, you have to go for the general training. Academic option is not accepted. If you don't want to appear for IELTS, you can go for CELPIP, and specifically for CELPIP general test, you cannot go for general LS test for express entry. Now talking about French, there are 2 different tests once again, TEF Canada and TCF Canada. Now here you have to score a certain level of points or bands in each section. So you have to score some minimum level of points in reading, listening, speaking and writing. What is the minimum eligibility criteria and what is the good score that you should actually achieve? We'll talk all about that later in the video. The validity for these test results is 2 years. So if that 2-year time period has crossed, then you would need to appear for the test once again. As far as the cost is concerned, it might cost differently from one country to the other and from one test to the other. For example, IELTS could cost you somewhere around 15,000 rupees in India, while CELPIP might cost only 10 to 12,000. Now, as I told you before, there's no particular order for the first and second step. While you're preparing for IELTS, you can send your education documents for the ECA, and while you get the results, you can also clear your language test, which would save a lot of time for you. Okay, not spending too much time on one step, let's move on to the next step, which is the profile creation. Now, based on your job duties, a knock code needs to be chosen. So every job duty would have a particular knock code, and after the profile is successfully created online based on certain parameters like age, education, job experience, spousal factors, etc., you would score a certain number of points. So the total number of points that you would score, that would be called your CRS score. CRS stands for Comprehensive Ranking System. At any time in the Express Entry pool, there are thousands of profiles and each profile has certain scores. When the draws are conducted, then the invitation to apply is sent to only those people who are able to clear the cutoff score. So it's not a lottery system, but based on your score, you would be given the ITA or invitation to apply. Now this particular process might somewhat change in November of 2022 when they might introduce occupation specific draws, but we don't have detailed information about it right now. As and when Canada releases information about it, I'll definitely make detailed video about it, so please do not forget to click the subscribe button. Okay, now what if your score is below the cutoff score? Does that mean you won't be able to apply for the PR? Thankfully, that's not the case because every Canadian province has its own immigration programs, and if you're able to get a nomination from any province, you would get 600 points, which would mean that you would be getting the ITA in the very next draw. Now, I've got a detailed video of the PNP programs for each province, and I've got a special playlist on my channel, so you can go on there and watch some videos about it if you're interested. Okay, now until this point, you don't have to spend any money on creating your profile. It is completely free of cost. Only after you get the ITA, you would have to pay. So if you're able to clear the cutoff score and you get the ITA, you move on to the next step, which is arranging the documents. Now, the time that you would get to do this is 60 days. In 60 days time, you have to submit your application after arranging all your documents. So I would say this is a very crucial stage. You have won half the battle when you got the ITA, but you cannot afford to do any mistakes at this point of time. Which all documents are required? The reference letters for each work experience, then the ECA report, language test certificate, medical certificate, police certificate, scan of passport, photographs, marriage or divorce certificates, birth certificate of children, proof of funds on bank letter, and job offer with LMI letter and PNP letter if it applies to you. Now you see I've mentioned 2 other very important points there, medical certificate and police certificate. So after you've got the invitation, you need to take appointment from a panel physician that are listed on the Canada's website, and you need to get a medical certificate. Similarly, you would also need a police certificate. So this 2 months time seems very less when you have to arrange all these documents. Okay, now one important point here is about proof of funds on bank letter. So Canada wants that you should have some money in your account as savings, so that when you come here in your initial days, you can spend that money in settling over when you're finding a job. So they have specified an amount depending on the number of family members. If you're single, if you're coming to Canada alone, then you would need 13,310 Canadian dollars. If you're two people, then you would need money which is equivalent to 16,570 Canadian dollars. And if you have one or more children, then you can see the list here. Pro tip here, considering the foreign exchange conditions, high fluctuations that keep happening regularly, I would suggest that you have some spare money. Maybe you can add $1,000 to $2,000 extra. You don't have to spend that money, just have to keep it in your account. Okay, now moving on to the next step, which is submitting your application. Now this step is very crucial because you cannot afford any mistake over here. Of course, you've arranged all the documents. Now you got the ITA, you've got 60 days time. In that 60 days, you have to fill all these forms, review them multiple times, and then after that, submit your application. Of course, this is an online thing, so it should not take too long, but it's very important that you give enough time to filling up all the information that is required there. You would be asked about a lot of details about you, your family, your travel history, your past residences of 10 years, and you have to fill all that detail very clearly. Now, until now, you might have noticed you haven't paid any fee, but now you have to pay a certain amount of fee, and the fee that you have to pay per person is $1,365. If you're applying with your spouse, you need to pay twice that amount, and for each dependent child, you have to pay $230 more. Now, the processing times are 1 to 6 months. It's very rare, but you can receive the confirmation in 1 month. In most of the cases, it would be from 5 to 6 months. The current times were off the charts, and people have been waiting for more than 2 years for the applications to be processed. But the Canadian government has said that most of the people who would be submitting their applications in the second half of 2022 and onwards would be served with the standard processing time, which is actually 6 months. After you get the confirmation on your email, then you would be getting 30 days time period to actually get your passport stamped with a Canadian visa. You would be given a single entry visa that would be stamped to the passport of you and your family members. You would need to get the appointment from the VFS centers in or near your city. Now at this point, all the verifications have been done, and you only need to submit the confirmation email, your passports, and 2 photographs. That's it. And after that, that visa stamping might take around 1 to 2 weeks, and you would get your visa. That completes the entire process. You are now ready to fly. Okay, now when we know the step-by-step process, we can check the eligibility criteria. This is the official webpage of Government of Canada, and here they have listed out the eligibility criteria for the 3 different programs. Before we discuss the eligibility criteria, let's quickly check out what does this CLB7, CLB5 actually mean. So first of all, if you go on to this page, you'll see that they have mentioned what scores are actually needed in order to get CLB7 or CLB9 or whatever CLB level. So let's say if you talk about IELTS, so for CLB7 you would need 6 in speaking, 6 to 7 in listening, in reading 6, and then again in writing 6. For CLB9 you would need 7, 8, 777. You'll always hear this 777-8, and that means CLB9. And similarly, you can see that same scores for different other tests as well. Very quickly, let me tell you about the NOC codes. So they have actually categorized those ones here. So skill type 0 are management jobs. Skill level A is professional jobs that usually call for degree or from a university, and similarly going forward as well. But this is something which is supposed to change. This is NOC code of 2016. From November 2022 onwards, they will be using a different NOC code that would be a different categorization, and I've got multiple videos on that, so you can go on to my channel to check that. But for now, until November, we have the same criteria which would be going along. Okay, now we can check the eligibility criteria. So if you're applying for Canadian experience class, in that case you would need English or French skills like CLB7 if you have a job in NOC 0 or A, and CLB5 if you have job in NOC B. Many people watching this video would be from this category, Federal Skilled Worker Program. So let me talk about it in detail. So CLB7 is required. So CLB7 is the minimum eligibility criteria, but CLB7 won't do much good for you. We'll talk about that later, why I'm saying that. Okay, now talking about the work experience. So for the Canadian experience class, you should have Canadian experience in 0A or B, and similarly for Federal Skilled Worker Program as well, but for Federal Skilled Trade Program it should be NOC B. Amount of work experience required, so 1 year in Canada in the last 3 years, that would mean that you're eligible for CEC class. And for Federal Skilled Worker, 1 year in the last 10 years, and that should be a continuous 1 year. And similarly for FSTP, 2 years in the last 5 years. For job offer, it is not required. Talking about education, for Canadian experience class, you would see that no education is required, while for the Federal Skilled Worker Program, there's certain criteria, but overall, this is the eligibility criteria. Okay, now talking about calculating your CRS score. Again, I've made detailed videos for almost all of these topics, but quickly actually going through this. So you'd see there are different points that are mentioned for different factors. For example, for age, there are different points for level of education, language proficiency, for Canadian work experience. For everything, you would have different points. And based on that, a total score would be calculated. So if you try and check for age, basically you would get maximum points if your age is less than 30. If you're from 20 to 29, you would get maximum number of points, 100 with a spouse and 110 without a spouse. And after that, the points would start reducing by every passing year. Then level of education, similarly for high school you would get 0 points, but for a degree like a PhD you would get maximum number of points. Similarly for the language test, you would get more points if you have good score. Now scoring CLB 10 is very difficult, but CLB 9 is pretty easy. If not easy, I would say that it is not that difficult. Depends from one person to the other, but if you can score CLB 9, you can score good points in the CRS calculator. So overall, there are all these factors that are mentioned here. You can come over to this page and check that out. But this is the CRS calculator. Through this calculator, answering some of the questions over here, you can actually get your score. So for example, what is your marital status? If you want to say, let's say you're single, it would keep asking you questions of what is your age. So let's say you say 28 years of age, whatever applies to you. So it would actually ask a bunch of questions, and based on that it would give you certain score. So here I've just given a random answers here to all the questions that the system has asked, and based on that it will show you something like this, that okay, the total score is 481. So it may depend from one person to the other of what points, what details actually you put in there. Depending on that, your score would be calculated. So this is the way how you can actually calculate your score. Okay, now talking about the cost, we'll talk about the savings and the expenses. So I already discussed about the savings and expenses in terms of the proof of funds. This is what we discussed earlier, the expenses at different steps. So overall actually it would cost one person around $2,500. That's Canadian dollars, and if you're a couple, then it would cost you around 5,000. If you have a kid as well, then as a family it would cost you something around 5,500. These are just the rough numbers. Of course, there might be something extra that you might need to pay, or you might be able to save some money somewhere, but this is just a rough estimate. This video would give you a heads up of how much financial preparation do you actually need, if you actually are ready for it right now or not. And these all expenses that I've mentioned here are only before flying to Canada. I haven't included the flight tickets or anything like that here. Okay, now moving ahead with the trends and the timelines. Now the world of Canadian immigration is never quiet, and in the last 2 years there's been a lot of noise because of the pandemic. A lot of temporary policies were announced, and finally now when we are seeing some stability in the pandemic, now we are starting to think of a post-pandemic world. So now, as I told you earlier, we can still expect some changes, but those changes are not small. In terms of express entry, those would be really big changes. So first of all, the NOC code would be changing from 2016 to 2021. That should not mean too much to too many people, but what that could mean is that they could start actually conducting the occupation specific draws. What does this mean? That CRS cutoff score, which is generic for everyone, for all occupations, that might change, and they can start inviting people whose skill set are required specifically in Canada. We don't know too much information about it, so you should actually subscribe to this channel if you want to know the future updates. But yes, this is something which is anticipated, and we can expect this sometime towards the end of this year or maybe early next year. Now, talking about the trends, first of all, the processing times. As I told you earlier as well, that the processing times have been off the charts. Canada hasn't been able to make up to the standard processing times, which was of 6 months. Many people actually have the processing times of 2 years, but that all might soon become history now, because they've said that going forward the processing times would be 6 months. Lastly, I want to talk about the cutoff scores. So what should be your target cutoff score? If you score something around 400 and you don't have any PNP, should you expect getting the PR? No, because it would be very difficult. If you have a low cutoff score, you should definitely target somehow improving your score. When they start the draws somewhere in the first week of July, we're expecting that the cutoff scores would revolve around 500, but then slowly, as in when they keep conducting these draws regularly, then the cutoff score would drop, and it could drop back soon to 470. It might take a couple of months, but it might drop back to somewhere around 470. Now, why I'm saying 470 is because it's a very important number, not just 470, like somewhere around 470. So let's say from 468 to 472, somewhere in that score range. It was the end of 2020 when the last all program express entry draws were conducted. Now we are expecting it once again from 6th of July onwards. And the last time the draws were being conducted, the score revolved around 470 only. However, it is very difficult to say right now, but at least that score range is something that you should target. Alright guys, so that's it for this video. Thanks a lot for watching it. If you have any comments, any feedback, please put it down in the comment section below. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please click the subscribe button before moving on to the next video. Thanks again.